All right. Welcome to the fourth edition of the dRep Book Club. This book club is put together by the Leadership Academy Book Club. Um, and there's a Miro board and a Discord for that. Um, and then we have this Miro board here. We've been talking about four different books, and today we're going to be talking about Reinventing Discovery by Michael Nielsen. But in previous episodes, we covered the white paper that kicked everything off with a treasury system for cryptocurrencies, enabling better collaborative intelligence. Then we moved into the power of experiments, decision making in a data-driven world. We then last time did Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And today we're back. Reinventing Discovery by Michael Nielsen. So just, I guess, quick show of hands. Has anybody read this book? We usually have people that show up who haven't read anything, but are really curious, other people that have read it and want to talk about it. I'm just curious where we're at, so I know how much to go over the contents of the book. And you could just do a little quick hand raise if you've read it. And if not, I can just dive into. Looks like we don't have a lot of people that have come having read this book. So I'll dive in a little bit. The book itself had two primary sections to the book. One was called Amplifying Collective Intelligence, and the second part of the book was about networked science. And then the first part had four main kind of areas in there. One was online tools make us smarter, was one claim it made. Restructuring expert attention, patterns of online collaboration, and the limits and potentials of collective intelligence. And one of the, or two of the examples that it used for online tools make us smarter was Kasparov versus the world. And it was an interesting kind of recap of a project where Kasparov, one of the leading chess players in the world, kind of went up against the whole rest of the world. And they did it through this kind of forum where people could suggest moves. And then collectively, they decided what the best move was to play against Kasparov. And he eventually did win the game, but he did note that the game had some really interesting moves that the collective intelligence of the planet kind of came up with, and really added to the canon of chess and kind of developed the theory of chess because of the way they played. So it was a really interesting kind of description of that. And the other one that they mentioned is Polymath, which is a blog where a mathematician put some interesting mathematical problems on his blog, and then other mathematicians and people would comment in the comment section, and they would work through a problem that way collectively. So that was an interesting example of two different ways that people are working online together to make us smarter. The next section was restructuring expert attention. And it really got into the topics of harnessing latent micro expertise. And the theory there was that we may not be experts across a field, but we may have certain bits of micro expertise where we really know something really well. And if we can collectively add all those little bits of micro expertise together through a system that's designed to collect it all, it comes up with something he was calling design serendipity, where the right experts at the right time can come together to solve this hard problem, where any one of them alone might not have been able to do so. And then he gets into a little bit of the patterns of online collaboration. He talks about MathWorks as one of the example projects. And this one really focused on things like micro contribution again, radical reuse, scores as signals to coordinate expert action, and converting individual insight into collective insight. And one of the interesting things about this was it was really, the MathWorks project, if I'm remembering correctly, had a problem, and then people could try to solve it. And it was a programming challenge. So it was really writing software. And basically you go to GitHub or wherever it was, and then you'd commit your code but instantly everybody who was participating could see the code you submitted. And the code would run through a series of tests and things that would measure how well it actually solved the problem. So they're looking for speed or accuracy or things like that. And at any point, anybody who saw that commit could clone your code, change one line of code because they saw a place where they could optimize it, and then they could recommit it, and then they would get a higher score and jump up in the leaderboard because they improved your code, which was initially at the top. And this kind of micro contribution and radical reuse of people's code kind of pushed things to the limit where people were micro optimizing code in places where the original person who created it might not have seen. And then somebody else could come up with a completely radical new idea, and then everybody would pile on and try to optimize that. And eventually it got to a solution space that probably no single person who was creating the software could have created on their own. And they did that through the ability to radically reuse contributions, to use scores as signals to coordinate the expert attention. So people would pay attention to who had the fastest code or who was scoring the highest in these categories, and look at their code and see if they could improve upon it. And then the other area, the limits of potential collective intelligence. So one of the ideas here was that one of the powers is converting individual insight into collective insight. But if you don't have a good mechanism for doing that, one of the downsides is that individual insight doesn't automatically convert into collective insight. So you need mechanisms to share that insight and get it to the right people at the right time, so they can then say, oh yeah, that's a really good insight. And then it starts to spread to the collective and it becomes a collective insight. And one of the ways that he talks about doing that is through the need for a shared praxis. And praxis is really a word that just means common practice. So coming up with mechanisms and tools and kind of systems for how we work together allows us to share information in common standard ways so that everyone can benefit from the stuff that's being contributed. So he talks a little bit about that. So that's kind of the first half of the book. The second half of the book talks about networked science, and he talks about all the world's knowledge. So we live in a unique period of time where all of the world's knowledge is available online in some way or form. And that's never been available before. So we're starting to find that being able to mine and use that data leads to some remarkable kind of emergent solutions to things. And one example they used was Google started this project called Flu Trends, Google Flu Trends. And really what they did was they just measured who was searching for the word influenza, and through geolocation and things like that, they could kind of predict that a lot of people are searching for influenza here. There's probably an influenza outbreak. And when they compared that to actual medical kind of tracking of the flus, they found that the Google stuff was really accurate and more of a leading indicator, because people start to search for those things as they get sick, not after and after they go to the hospital. So just the activity of searching was able to predict flu trends throughout the world, which was kind of interesting. He talks about the concept of open data. One of the big projects that was mentioned here was the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, where the satellite took a digital survey of the sky, and through having that data available to scientists, they were able to come up with some unique discoveries and find different things. And it really led to kind of the concept of data-driven intelligence, where if we have enough data, we can get some pretty remarkable discoveries just by analyzing the data itself, rather than doing experiments. And one area that was mentioned was democratizing science. So there's a project called Galaxy Zoo, which takes pictures of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of galaxies. And they ask just individuals to download the software. It'll pop up an image frame, and then they can see if they can identify galaxies in there. And they're really trying to say, is this galaxy spiraled this way, or is it a blob, or different kinds of things, so that they can start to classify galaxies. But it's led to a couple of independent discoveries where there was one thing, this woman named Hannah discovered an object that looked weird, and it was kind of this blob, and they called it Hannah's Vorwerp. And I guess Vorwerp means object or something like that. And then later on, scientists were able to look at that and say, yes, this is kind of new and unique, and it spawned a whole sub-branch of research into what this is. And then some other people discovered something they're calling green peas, and some of the galaxies they saw just look like little green peas. And after a lot of research into that, it discovered that that is actually a new type of galaxy, and that became kind of a thing. So these things were discovered by people, just average amateurs that are going through pictures. And after a while, they know what looks normal, and when something's abnormal, they can call people's attentions to it. So it gets into when amateurs start to rival professionals. And another example they gave is a program called Foldit, where people can do protein folding based on DNA kind of things and see what kind of shapes it can fold. And there's an annual competition between where people can come and try to see how proteins will fold, and they kind of compete with their results, and then it's compared to actual experimental results to see which ones actually came closest or were most accurate. And in these, amateurs who have been participating through the Foldit get so good at being able to kind of figure out how proteins could fold that they're rivaling the professionals in this space. And then it gets into this whole area of citizen science and what that means, and kind of the emergence of this as a kind of a new thing where formally trained scientists aren't the only ones who are able to do science and discover some useful things. And yeah, Einstein.
So I come from psychology, and I think it's like interesting about like schemas, like how experts basically structure their knowledge. In your examples, like for example, when you look at the galaxy in a new way, like this is where the groupthink really comes to shine. It's when like the what you're looking for doesn't match the schemas or the a priori knowledge, basically. So this is going to be a very powerful time for us, because we will be able to get that big data out to new eyes and try to identify new things that doesn't match our current knowledge or expert knowledge about these things. So that's just my observation about it. It's like it's a common thread in how not experts will look at things. They will look at it through another schema than what experts will do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and the book was talking a lot about that specific kind of thing. Is yeah, the being able to open up data to more and more people can lead to this kind of compounding kind of effect of where we start to discover more and more things. And yeah, and then the next part, the book talked about the challenge of doing science in the open. And there's been a lot of, like through Galaxy Zoo and Sloan Digital Sky Survey and other data sets being opened up. But it's also not always successful. So there are a couple of examples where there's a number of science wikis that popped up, or other areas where they were expecting user contributed comments, kind of in the same vein as the Polymath blog, which was very successful, to take off. But they found that a lot of the times it was the scientists who kicked it off who do most of the work and most of the comments and most of the content contribution, and other people just don't. They just come to read it. And they attributed it to a couple of things, where most scientists in the current system are compensated well when they produce scientific papers and get published. And if they do any activities that's not that, there's no economic incentive to participate. And so contributing to wikis, updating articles, sharing their knowledge currently doesn't have a whole lot of stuff to make it compelling for them to do. So they found that, yeah. And it also ties into secrecy, where scientists are, because they need to publish and publish first their ideas, there's a bit of secrecy and the hiding of knowledge until you publish so that you can get credit for it. That's kind of slowing things down as well. And there's this whole kind of system in place that doesn't really cater to open science. So then he gets into the last part of the book, which is the science, calls the open science imperative. And he said there's probably two ways to open up science. One is by compelling open science. And some ways that this is now happening is some grant and funding agencies are saying you have to be participating in an open way for you to get funded. So it actually compels people to do it because it's part of the funding requirement. And in the book, they gave examples like some country, I forget what it was, recent, not too long ago, decided to change from driving on the left side to the right side. And you can't just hope that 10% of the population does it. You have to have everybody do it all at once, or it's going to be chaos. So that's kind of the same thing with open science is because there are some economic incentives that go against being open, you need to just compel everybody to do it at once, and then it becomes kind of a standard. The other way to do it is by incentivizing open science. And they were coming up with kind of ideas around reputation tracking and other incentives where most scientific papers are locked behind paywalls where to actually download the actual paper from Elsevier Science or some of these other places where papers are published, you have to pay a fee. And papers are generally locked away unless you are part of a university and have unlimited access and things. The average person can't just pay for 10,000 research papers and download them and try to collate the information. But there is this kind of website where scientists upload a pre-draft of their paper to get some feedback on it. And these sites are open and free, and the papers are essentially near done, so they're almost identical to what's eventually published. But this is where they've seen that a lot of people go to this site and look at papers, and they start to link back to these papers because they have access to them from other sources. So these chains of reputation start to form. So that could be another way of doing it is incentivizing the number of backlinks or reputation links from other papers or research that referenced your work because it was open. And then getting into a position where getting funding or being hired to these research labs or things like that, they can look at reputation in these kind of mechanisms as one way of actually hiring people. And then that would kind of incentivize being open and making sure that your work is well enough known that you have all these reputational links and other things going on. So that was kind of at a high level what the book was about. It was, for me, of the four, a fairly dry read, but it was interesting. It had some really good examples and brought some things to mind. So some things that I was just wondering was, it was recommended by IOG for dReps to read. So I was wondering how might Catalyst and dReps use this information of openness and open science. And I thought that might be a good conversation question, but I threw some others out here if people want to jump onto any of these. But yeah, one thing that was really interesting to me was the reputation kind of incentive. And yeah, so that might be a jump off point too. But Ken, you have your hand up.
I several years ago, I played around with Bolded a bit. It was pretty fun. It's sort of like turned into a game. So like the gamification aspect of it, I think might be part of what brought people or onboarded people into that project.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I'm just like, nope. So was it a gamified experience where you get points or compete against
Yeah,
people?
they can easily detect if something is close to an optimal fold, but
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for them to figure out how to fold it. Like it's the complex part is getting it folded, but then you can test to see how good the outcome is. So you get a score based on how good the fold is. So it's interesting the way that the the outcome, you can, if you can put a score on the outcome, then you can incentivize people just by playing it like a game.
That's interesting. I wonder how that can kind of translate into Catalyst. Like, can we make PA, VPA things kind of game-like? Is that what we want? Um,
I think the fact that the score is the actual outcome that they're looking for. So they're looking um, for folds with a higher score that represents a more meaningful outcome, or a better, like the actual goal that they're searching for is is directly correlated to the scores. So like if you can't really have it, like people trying to game the system, if they're coming up with ways to get a better score, then they're just coming up with ways to understand how to fold proteins better. So if you can make the score directly a result of having a better process or something that's more efficient, or that directly relates to the goal, then gamification or people trying to game the system can even be a good thing.
mm. Yeah, those are really good points. I see people have added a few sticky prediction markets are another sort of incentive. Um, share dRep reward in a group and given portion for the work done by the group for some gamification. dRep group sorting through voting data together. MBO. Um, do the people who want to put those up talk to those in a little more detail?
Oh, I can try. I mean, I just thought when he gave the example about folding, then like, how can we gamify it? Like, what are the resources available to us? We could do test nets. So we know now there will be a Catalyst testnet structure. So that's one possibility. We could do the ADA incentives and do it like that. We could reward them in some form of social recognition or credits for that. Like in the science world, we have these citations, but why can't we do something similar for our Catalyst voting process? Like and build up a reputation by the work you do and measure it. So I don't know if this will be a token or a value or I'm really not sure yet, like how to do this properly. But this just occurred to me when we are talking about this gamification.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I wonder, for me, one of the missing pieces would be for Catalyst, how to measure the success of a project. Like, what was its actual return? Um, and
Yeah.
not always monetary. So it's hard to measure other ones like community building or other things. But if we could somehow quantify that, then you could see the people who did the PA, the VPA, the proposer themselves, and the people who voted. you can kind of score in a way to the success of these individual roles within the ecosystem. To say,
I agree. That's going to be a hard one to like agree upon a framework for what is actually value.
yeah,
Or yeah, but it's not impossible. Like you cannot like iterate on it and make the framework itself something that you do this improvement process on. So I'm optimistic. It's possible to try.
yeah, because once we have that, then it's possible to do all sorts of reputation-based incentives to say this group of people are more successful at predicting which projects will be valuable in the end, or these proposers have the greatest return on investment through these projects. And you start to build that reputational kind of thing, and it incentivizes people to actually deliver value because it's visible. Yeah, I think that might be worth trying to figure out and finding ways of doing that.
Yeah. Oh, there's a few more stickies.
Yeah, I see Jeremy writing stuff down. How are proposal outcomes connected to proposers, dReps, reviewers? And how do we discover natural or latent feedback loops that contain the info about these connections? Yeah. Personal process optimization is a type of gamification. It requires more complexity to be an available choice. And these are all really good thoughts. And I like that. Yeah, like when amateurs rival professionals, kind of in the whole citizen science kind of thing. Some of what we're doing is trying to democratize the selection of things we think are going to be valuable, or through voting, through our proposal assessments and things like that. So I think, it goes pretty deep to think about, the role of PAs and how they interact and help voters and how voters vote. And because we're collectively trying to decide which projects will deliver the greatest value for the ecosystem. In some way, that's kind of the high level kind of reason why we're doing this. Or is it, there could be a whole bunch of reasons to vote. Like we now have $50 million or 50 million ADA in Fund 10, and a bunch of new categories as well. Do we effectively distribute that funds through the community so that we keep the most promising projects and groups alive, or is it the ideas and the results? Yeah, I think that what we measure and how we measure it, for me, is one of the crucial things that I still don't see very strongly. So it feels like my votes get out there and proposals win, and they either complete or they don't, but I don't know overall if my vote was good or bad. You know what I mean? It's because we don't have that feedback mechanism.
That's a great point for the slide about personal processing, the optimization. It goes for the voter itself. Like, how can you get some big data on how your vote influenced the whole process, and what were the results on it? So it's a really good point, really, that slide.
Yeah. And because I'm a co-host, I saw Sean hop into the meeting a little while ago. It would have been interesting to have him here because he actually runs one of the citizen science projects on top of Cardano. He runs litter coin, and has an app where people track litter throughout the world and get rewarded in litter coins, which they can then spend at zero waste stores that he's onboarding to the kind of to create this ecosystem. And it'd be really curious to hear how that's coming along and how that's working, because he's a big proponent of citizen science. What about the open data idea and data-driven intelligence? Like, how do we open up data in our space in Catalyst so that people can use it to make kind of new insights or discoveries based just by looking at the data? And how do we get that data to be as open as possible so that people are able to take a look at it? And I know Catalyst is moving towards an open source kind of thing with APIs and all that, which I think is great. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of projects out there that still kind of think in the old Web 2 style, where they collect a bunch of data, throw it into an Oracle database, put a web page on top of it, maybe create an API so you can access the data, but it's still locked away inside of this database that you need to ask permission to get into. And are there ways, because we're blockchain, can we democratize the data itself by putting it on chain or putting metadata on chain, or at least the hashes that point to IFS buckets or other Web3 kind of data repositories that are open and accessible to people? I've always thought that'd be a great way to structure even like the data source of Catalyst for people's proposal submissions. It should be in a file on IFS somewhere, and it's only sucked into a database to speed up the kind of delivery of the web interface and all that. But the raw data itself should be out there on the Web3 that we can import, download, query on chain for the metadata about everything. And that just encourages people to use that data in any way they want, which could result in some really interesting kind of analysis or different trends or things that people could surface.
Yeah, I think to start with, like actually building this data, making it available. So the question in the chat was how we begin to collect this data. For me, as I know some of the technical limitations of blockchain, like we see it now with the meme coins, like Cardano is already at full congestion. So I'm thinking it's very natural to start to collect this data on testnets, on, for example, polling. We did this mainnet polling, and why can't we do some form of live polling during a Catalyst round on the testnets? And I definitely agree with you. Like we need to store this also somewhere. So and it's faster if you do it on IPFS, especially metadata, because I think how are we going to learn and evolve if we don't like keep the old data and to we can only get like new interferences as long as we keep the old data and then see new patterns on it. So yeah, I definitely agree. We start with a question like how do we actually gather this data? That's a very important question to ask here.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone aware of any CIPs or other proposals to create metadata standards to publish data? Like in my world, some of the things we think about are being able to query what are all the different organizations in Cardano that are building something. And if they had the ability to self-publish the fact that they exist and this is what they do onto chain or into Web3 somehow, that would be super useful to be able to query back. Because today I have to go to Cardano Cubed or Lido Nation or some of these other proprietary kind of websites that have this data, but the data is often not open and it's not shared. And often I just want a small slice of it. So I want to be able to query that out myself in some way. But yeah, but I'm not aware of all the kits in flight. So I'd be delighted if there were some CIPs that were addressing some of this on how to publish this kind of data.
I love that idea, like a Cardano CLI, but for checking organizations working, pulling out what the exact data you wanted from that. It's really cool. And making it platform agnostic, I'm a real proponent for. I think there's a few. I think actually in the NFT community, they're working a bit on making some data available. Like you can store data as an NFT, and then it's easily transferred, and you can, for example, books, but also articles, you can store as NFTs, and that's easy to pull. That's easy to transfer. That's something you can use whatever tool you want to use this NFT for. So I'm thinking maybe like some form of metadata around vote rationale could be cool to experiment with NFTs. I don't know, but
yeah, I think what would be nice is to just have some kind of standard that we can agree on, and then anybody can implement that. Both.
Yeah, this standard should be like widely adopted tools for like this. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, yeah, those are some of my own personal dreams, is that somebody can propose a proposal that we all get behind, and then now we have a metadata standard or an NFT standard or something where all of this could start to be published onto chain in some way. And then it'll just create this whole ecosystem of people. Like, some people don't know how to mint an NFT and create this data, so they can create a website where you pay like a few ADA, put in your data, and it does it for you. Other websites can consolidate and query all this data and display it in different ways so that you can see it. And it's just this whole ecosystem can be built around this data rather than these little pockets of data here and there.
I love that idea. Here's your organization NFT that you have created through this tool. Now you use it through all of the other available tools to put forth your ideas, meet people that have share your interest, and create your own platform for it. I really like it.
Yeah, I think those kind of things are super powerful, and will, if it catches on, they just kind of take on their life of its own. And yeah, it can be a great way to have open data through the ecosystem. But I think we need to really get the core data out there too, like all of the Catalyst proposals and the voting results and things like that are really important. And anybody should be able to get that data and analyze it and use it for different purposes. What other topics were there? So we covered open data, gamification, and yeah. So one of my biggest things was trying to constantly figure out, this is the dRep book club. How does this book and its topics relate back to dReps? And I was having a little bit of a challenge there. But there are a few things that seem to apply, at least if you go broader out into the whole Catalyst space and things like that. But and I guess for dReps, it's really around, yeah, that decision making of who and what to vote for. I think is one of the things. So a lot of things we talked about can help with that.
I mean, like the core issue here is like, as a voter or dRep that represent many other voters, like you cannot be an expert on everything. So you need to find a tool to leverage maybe you have some of your delegators have this like micro knowledge about this specific topic. So how do we dReps need some form of tooling to leverage the knowledge of our delegation base? I guess it's
And yeah, that's an interesting kind of connection that I just made, is being able, because right now delegation goes to dReps, and like all stake pool staking, they're kind of an anonymous kind of a delegation. So you don't really know who delegated to you. But if we had some mechanism where dReps could also pass on that idea of, where is it? Latent micro expertise, where they can say, I really know this project, even though I've delegated to you. I just want to make sure you know that they're working on this, this, and this, and that they've accomplished these 7 things or whatever it is to help you make those decisions. So that it's not just a dRep voting, but it's an entire community of people behind that dRep coming together to help them make a really good decision.
That is powerful, and it doesn't even have to be like breaking your personal details. You can still be anonymous and show what through proof what is your latent micro expertises. So yeah, that's a very strong thought, Nori. I completely agree.
Yeah, I wonder how we can make that happen.
So you could have some form of publish that you publish what is your expertise, and you have some form of data backing up that expertise. Others could then try to validate this. There's many like papers about validation, like how do you validate claims basically of expertise. And then after this validation, then and this should be something you opt into, like you have delegated to this dRep, and then you can probably publish something on chain about your expertise, and then you publish also on evidence, and this goes through this like vetting process, and then you have this is my expertise, and then when there's a topic that matches this, and then I guess we would actually have to put some data into our proposals so that we can filter the proposals to this expertise for some. But yeah, there's so many pieces that need to fit there. But those are the things that come to my mind now. Like what do we need to match here? But Ken seems to have a question, I guess.
Yeah, Ken, your hands up.
Like I've been spending a lot of time working on ideas that are related to this topic. Like if you're talking about expertise, that's like just the the um like people's expertise. Like you need to look at it at a much finer grain than just like a title of what they know about. Like I've been spending a lot of time studying different concepts related to knowledge graphs, and how can you build knowledge graphs and connect them together between different people, like in a distributed system. And you like you if you can um like there's the idea of Zettelkasten, so like where you are building up a structure of notes, like and like atomic notes and how they fit together with each other. And so like you can represent your knowledge in like atomic components that connect to other atomic components, and like the knowledge is in how things interact with each other. And so you need to be able to translate that from just a knowledge graph representing one person's knowledge to representing the interactions between different pieces of knowledge across the entire community. And so like I've been thinking about ways to do that similar to, there's a lot of things that it's similar to, like in, you were talking about IPFS. So like if you can have like that basically stores information that is important to people because when you pin something in IPFS, you're saying that it's something that you want to hold on to. And so like it may not like you might need someone to store the entire history, like maybe if you're talking about a knowledge graph, you can talk about the time dimension, like how your knowledge graph starts and then how it transforms over time. That's just an additional dimension to a knowledge graph. And so like that you can you can use IPFS to store things easily that are important to people because they're going to keep it on their computer. Um, another common or another thing that's similar in structure is get, like how you have a graph that represents the changes in code over time. And so I've been thinking about combining those ideas and using like a graph structure that encodes like the relationships between different objects in the graph in terms of dimensions. So like there's a thing called algebraic graphs. So like you can multiply graphs together or add graphs or do a union between graphs. Like I've been thinking about like like multi-dimensional algebraic graphs where if you have a types for different objects in the graph and you have types for the connections between the objects in the graph, then you can get some of the same sorts of type safety that you get in like a functional programming language in the structure of a knowledge graph. So I don't know. That's just some of the stuff I've been thinking about related to project I've been trying to work on. It's related to this topic.
Mhm. Those are really great thoughts. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I love you started with talking about how to join knowledge graphs from different people. And yeah, I'm a big Obsidian user and I've used other tools, but they're mostly like me, my notes, my thoughts. I link between them. I can see backlinks and all that with my own knowledge graph and my PKM system. Um, but yeah, if there were an easy way to get access to someone else's knowledge graph and then start backlinking to things that they've written, and then you start to create those interconnections between them.
Yeah, part of the problem with Obsidian is that everybody sort of figures out their own method for structuring a knowledge graph, and no one really has the same workflow and how they structure things because it depends on what they want to do, which is good in ways, but you need to be able to have some shared structure so that the different graphs can fit together. And that's sort of why part of what I was thinking about, like adding some algebraic structure to it, like where you can specify the type of your graph and the type of how the connections in your graph fit together. And if someone else has the same specification for part of their knowledge graph, then it should be possible to mechanically connect those graphs together, like in an application.
How do you break down knowledge into atomic units? Like, let's take knowledge about Cardano blockchain. So maybe have a broad overview. What's the throughput of it? Maybe we would
Well,
know it. Yeah, okay.
you can like it basically you want to think of things as like atomic thoughts. So like say that, okay, you're what is a UTXO, and that's connected to what's the difference between a UTXO and an EUTXO, and like just the atomic units, and then you have those connected with edges to the other things that they're related to, and it helps you sort of structure the relationship between the different pieces of knowledge that are important to whatever you're working on. Like not everybody has to have everything in their knowledge graph, but like if you can search through and find things that are related to what you're working on, and they're useful to helping you structure your knowledge for a project you're working on, then that's basically all that's required. You don't need to know everything, but having access to what you want to know is what's important.
How do you create what's related to each other? Is it the users themselves who sort this data?
I think that's probably the best, the most valuable sorts of connections would be the connections that the users make themselves. It's possible to use AI or something to suggest connections. Also, if you're talking about like complete graphs between ideas. So like you have a set of objects in your graph, and then you can just generate all the possible connections between those objects. And then looking at those connections can sort of inspire you to think about how these different objects that are in a group can be connected. And that's just a mechanical connection of the objects in the graph. So like it would be the user who's coming up with why that connection is meaningful, but the computer can help to establish what connections are possible in that graph structure.
Really cool. It's like a connection map that you present, and then the users
Yeah.
sort it.
Mhm. The way I see something working could be like an Obsidian-like tool where the files are stored on IPFS, and through some metadata you can query like all the notes related to this tag or whatever it is. But you can also store your maps of content, somehow represent all the links, and then it's a shared space so other people can link their thoughts to your thoughts, and everything starts to grow out on in the Web3 space. That could be really powerful. And then I could take Einstein or Ken's personal digital garden that has your curated set of notes from the space that you think are important in the links you've created, and I could browse kind of that thought space.
Yeah, that's really cool. You could even like map the connections and put them over each other and see where do you differ, where do you equal. It's so powerful to present the big data like this. Cool.
Love it. Sounds like it could be a fun 10 proposal for somebody.
Yeah, and there's 50 million ADA up for grabs for it. So, and we definitely want tooling for voting.
I've submitted proposals for this. The idea, similar iterations of the idea in the past. Haven't gotten any funding for it yet, but I'll probably try to do it again.
All right. Now that I know about it, I'll keep an eye out for it.
Okay.
All right. We are getting fairly well into this. I don't want this recording to be too long either for people who are catching this asynchronously on YouTube. But yeah, I just want to thank everybody for your participation today and talking about this book. I hope it has interested you to actually go out and download and read the book. But if not, the conversation has been really great, and I think it it got into some really interesting kind of stuff here at the end, talking about how we can apply some of this thinking to the space that we're in right now for Catalyst and dReps. So yeah, I think that was an excellent conversation. So yeah, I want to thank everybody who showed up and participated. This is the last funded dRep book club, but Fun 10's coming, so who knows what's going to happen next. I like the book club format, and once a month seems to be a good cadence. So who knows, maybe it'll continue even without funding, because it's just a lot of fun. But yeah, I want to thank everybody for showing up, and check it out. All 4 books are on the Miro here, all the videos, and this next one will be posted here as well, and they're all on YouTube. So you can catch up, you can watch and see what we've been talking about. But yeah, thanks everybody.
Nori, can I just say it was a really good overview of the books. So thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. I think just preparing this helps me really internalize and consolidate the reading for myself. So I find it a useful exercise. I'm very happy to do it.
I learned the most about psychology was when I was presenting it for my students, really. So I definitely agree on that. It's preparing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I'm going to keep doing it. And thanks for always showing up with excitement and participating and all your thoughts. I think it's a great kind of emergent space where we kind of share all these ideas and things.
Yeah, there's not that many book clubs on Carano, so I really appreciate to have this space. It's a good one. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.